This is the story of Thumbelina, part of Andersen's Fairy Tales, translated by Valdemar Paulson. There was once a woman who wished very much for a tiny child, but she did not know where she would get one, so she went to an old witch. "I would love so to have a little child," she said to the witch. "Will you please tell me where I can get one?" "Oh, yes, that can easily be managed," said the witch. "Here is a barley corn, but it is not of the kind that grows in the farmer's field, or is fed to chickens. Plant it in a flower pot, and see what happens." "Thank you," said the woman, and she gave the witch 12 bright shillings. Then she went home and planted the barley corn, and immediately it sprang up a great beautiful flower, which looked exactly like a tulip. But the petals were tightly closed, as though the flower were still a bud. "This is a lovely flower," said the woman, and she kissed its beautiful red and yellow cup. Just as she kissed it, the flower opened with a loud pop. It was a real tulip, as one could see, but in the middle of the flower, upon the green stamens, sat a tiny little maiden, wonderfully delicate and beautiful. She was not over half a thumb's height in length, and so she was called Thumbelina. She was given a beautifully polished walnut shell for a cradle, violet blue leaves for mattresses, and rose leaf for a coverlet. There she slept at night, but in the daytime she played about on the table, where the woman had set a plate of wreath with a wreath of flowers all around it, their stalks standing in water. On the water in this plate floated a great tulip leaf, and on this the little maiden could sail from one side of the plate to the other. She had 2 white horse hairs with which to row, and a very pretty sight it all made indeed. She could sing also, and so delicately and sweetly that nothing like it had ever been heard before in the world. One night she lay in her pretty bed, and an old toad came hopping in through the window, where a pane had been broken out. The toad was very ugly, big, and damp, and it hopped right down to the table where Thumbelina lay sleeping under the red rose leaf. "That would be a lovely wife for my son," said the toad. Without more ado, she seized the walnut shell in which Thumbelina slept, and hopped away with it through the broken window pane down into the garden. There flowed a great broad brook. The ground at the edge of the water was swampy and soft, and here lived the toad and her son. Ugh! He was ugly and repulsive. He looked just like his mother. Croak, croak, the cakes. That was all he could say when he saw a pretty little maiden in the walnut shell. "Don't talk so loud, or she'll wake up," said the old toad. "She could run away from us yet, for she is light as a bit of swan's down. We must put her out in the brook, on one of the broad lily leaves. It will seem just like an island to her, she is so small and light. Then she could not run away while we're getting to the parlor in order under the soft mud. We two are going to keep house together." Out in the brook grew many water lilies. Their broad green leaves looked as if they were floating on top of the water. The leaf farthest out of the brook was the largest, so the old toad swam out on it, laid the walnut shell with Thumbelina still asleep. Early in the morning the poor little maid woke. When she saw where she was, she began to cry bitterly. For there was water on all sides of the great leaf, and she could not get to land. The old toad sat in the marsh, decking out her room with marsh grasses and yellow weeds. It was to be made very pretty for her new daughter-in-law. Then she swam out with her ugly son to the leaf where Thumbelina stood. They had come to fetch her pretty bed, which was to be placed in the bridal chamber before she herself entered it. The old toad bowed low in the water before her and said, "This is my son. He is to be your husband, and you shall live splendidly together down in the mud." Croak, croak, the cakes, was all the son could say. Then they took their dainty little bed and swam away with it, leaving Thumbelina all alone on the great leaf. She wept, for she did not want to live with the nasty toad, or have her ugly son for a husband. The little fishes swimming in the water below had seen the toad and heard what he had said. So they put their heads out of the water, for they wanted to get a look at the little girl. When they saw how wonderfully pretty she was, they felt very sorry that she would have to go down to live with the ugly toad. No, that must never be. They crowded around the green stalk, which held the leaf on which the little maiden stood. They gnawed it with their teeth. Away floated the leaf far down the stream with Thumbelina, far away where the toad could not get her. Thumbelina sailed on and on. The little birds that sat in bushes saw her and sang, "What a lovely little maiden!" Further and further floated the leaf, and thus out of the country traveled Thumbelina. The beautiful little white butterfly kept fluttering around her, and at last alighted on the leaf, for it liked Thumbelina very much. She too was pleased and happy, for now the toad could not get her, and everything was so beautiful about her as she floated along. The sun shone upon the water, which glistened like the brightest gold. Then she took her girdle and bound one end of it round the butterfly, fastening the other end to the ribbon of the leaf. The leaf now glided onward much faster, and Thumbelina too, for when she was standing on the leaf, Just then a big beetle came flying along. He saw her and immediately clasped his claw around her slender waist, flew up with her into a tree. The green leaf went floating away down the brook, and the butterfly with it, for he was fastened to the leaf and could not get loose. My, how frightened poor little Thumbelina was when the beetle carried her off into a tree, but she was most sorry for the beautiful white butterfly that she had bound to the leaf. If he could not free himself, he would have to starve to death. The beetle, however, did not trouble himself about that. He seated himself with her on the biggest green leaf in the tree, gave her the honey of flowers to eat, and declared that she was very pretty, though she did not in the least resemble a beetle. Later, all the other beetles who lived in the tree came to pay a visit. They looked at Thumbelina, and all the young lady beetles shrugged their shoulders. "Why," they said, "she only has 2 legs. What a wretched appearance! She has no feelers," they cried. "Her waist is quite slender. Fie! She looks like a human being. How ugly she is," said all the lady beetles. Yet Thumbelina was so very, very pretty. That, too, was the opinion of the beetle who found her and seized her. But when all the others declared she was ugly, he too believed it at last, and would not have her at all. She might go where she pleased. They flew down from the top of the tree with her and set her upon a daisy, and she wept because she was so ugly that the beetles would not have her. Yet she was the loveliest little being one could imagine, and as fine and delicate as a rose leaf. All the summer through, poor Thumbelina lived quite alone in the great wood. She wove herself a bed out of blades of grass and hung it near a large burdock leaf, which protected her from the rain. She gathered the honey from the flowers for food, and drank the dew which every morning lay on the leaves. Thus summer and autumn passed, but now winter, the cold, long winter. All the birds that had sung so sweetly flew away. Trees and flowers lost their leaves. The great leaf under which she had lived shriveled up, and nothing remained of it but a withered stalk. She was dreadfully cold, for her clothes were torn, and she herself was so frail and delicate. Poor little Thumbelina! She would surely freeze to death. Now it began to snow, and every snowflake that fell upon her was like a whole shovelful thrown upon one of us. For we are tall, and she is only 1 inch long. Then she wrapped herself in a withered leaf, but it would not warm her. She shivered with the cold. Close to the wood where the beetle led her lay a great cornfield, but the corn had since been cut, and only naked dry stubble stood up along the frozen ground. To her it seemed like wandering through a great forest, and oh, how she trembled with cold. She then came to the door of a field mouse, a little hole under the stubble, where, warm and comfortable, the field mouse lived, with a whole room full of corn, a glorious kitchen and pantry. Poor Thumbelina stood at the door, just like a poor beggar girl, and asked for a tiny piece of barley corn, for which she had not had the smallest morsel to eat for 2 whole days. "You poor little creature," said the field mouse. After all, she was a good old field mouse. "Come with me in my warm room and dine with me." She was very much pleased with Thumbelina. If you like, she said, you may stay with me through the winter, but you must keep my room clean and neat, and tell me stories, for of them I am very fond. So Thumbelina did as the kind old field mouse bade her, and lived very comfortably and well. I am expecting a visit very soon, said the field mouse. My neighbor is in the habit of coming to see me once a week. He's even better off than I am. He has great wings, wears a beautiful black velvety fur coat. If you could only get him for a husband, you'd be well off. But he cannot see. You must tell him the prettiest stories you know. Thumbelina, however, did not care about this. She thought nothing of the neighbor, for he was a mole. He came and paid his visits in the black velvet coat. The field mouse told how rich and learned he was, and how his house was more than 20 times larger than hers. He possessed great learning, but did not like the sun, the beautiful flowers, for he had never seen them. Thumbelina had to sing, and she sang both Lady bird, fly away home, and When the parson goes afield. The mole fell in love with her because of her beautiful voice, but he said nothing, so sedate was he. A short time before, the mole had dug a long passage in the ground from his own home to theirs, and Thumbelina, the field mouse, received permission to walk there whenever they pleased. But he begged them to not be afraid of the dead bird that lay in the passage. It was a real bird with wings and a beak. It certainly must have died a short time before, and was now buried just where the mole had made his tunnel. The mole took a bit of decayed wood in his mouth, for you see, it glimmers like fire in the dark, and walked ahead, lighting them through the long dark passage. When they came to where the dead bird lay, the mole thrust his nose against the ceiling, made a great hole through which daylight could shine. In the middle of the floor lay the dead swallow, his beautiful wings pressed close against his sides, and his head and feet drawn under his feathers. The poor bird had certainly died of cold. Thumbelina was so very sorry for him. She was very fond of all the little birds. They had sung and twittered so prettily for her all throughout the summer. But when the mole gave it a push with his short legs and said, "Now he doesn't squeak any more. It must be miserable to be born a little bird. I'm thankful that can't happen to one of my children. Such a bird has nothing but his tweet tweet and has to starve in the winter." "Yes, as a clever man, you may well say that," observed the field mouse. "Of what use is all this tweet tweet to a bird when winter comes? He must starve and freeze." But they say that's very aristocratic. Thumbelina said nothing, but when the two others turned their backs to the bird, she bent down, put aside the feathers which covered her head, and kissed the closed eyes. "Perhaps it was he who sang so prettily to me last summer," she thought. "How much pleasure he gave me, the dear, beautiful bird." The mole now closed up the hole through which the daylight shone, and accompanied the ladies home. For during the night, Thumbelina could not sleep, so she got out of bed, where she wove a large, beautiful carpet out of hay. This she carried down, spread over the dead bird, and laid soft cotton, to which she had found the field mouse's room, around him, so he might lie soft and warm in the cold ground. "Farewell, you pretty bird," said she. "Farewell, and thanks to you for your beautiful song last summer, when all the trees were green and the sun shone warm upon us." Then she laid her head on the bird's breast. And that's where I'm going to call part 1 of this one for Thumbelina. The next part will be coming out in the next couple of days. Thank you for listening.